My husband, who is quite ruthless, devised a unique punishment for my cheating behavior. I've just come to realize that I am married to an extremely wicked man. He lacks compassion and forgiveness. I had no idea the man I've been living with harbored such malevolence. How could anyone treat their own wife with such intense hatred? Yes, I cheated on him, and I've been doing so for a long time. Many will label me as foolish and heartless, and I'm aware of this because I used to read comments on other people's posts. My husband, who is 43 years old, and I, 33 years old, have been married for a decade. I hadn't originally planned on marrying at 23, but life didn't go according to my plans, so I had to settle down. I met my husband when I was 20 years old. At the time, I was already in college and had many friends. I come from a family of 5, including an older brother and a stepsister. My father had another child outside of his marriage to my mother, so I have a younger sister from that situation. Despite our financial struggles, my father couldn't restrain himself from having another child, which became a burden. I don't mean my younger sister is a burden, but the circumstances surrounding her birth were. Back then, my father couldn't even afford to pay for our dinners. He worked at his friend's car wash business and barely earned any money. My mother, on the other hand, has always been the sole provider for our family. She worked as a high school teacher but took on multiple side jobs to support us. We were just getting by. So when my father had another child, it made life even more challenging. I only got into college because my older brother ensured that I did. I made some friends in college and managed to fit in. College served as my escape from home, as my parents would have heated arguments every evening, either about money or trivial matters. One day in college, I met my husband when he came to repair something on our campus. He worked as a technician and was the college's go-to person for fixing things. Honestly, I didn't pay much attention to my husband the first time I saw him. He didn't pique my interest, and I didn't even notice him until one of my friends pointed out that he had been staring at me. It was so amusing that I burst into laughter that day. I thought my friends were joking because I had no intention of getting involved with a technician. I thought we had nothing in common. Eventually, my husband approached me and confessed that he liked me. I was with my friends at the time, and I had to suppress the urge to laugh in his face. I didn't consider myself exceptionally attractive, but I was confident enough to know that I didn't find my husband attractive in any way. I informed him that I already had a boyfriend and then left him standing in the hallway. When I got home that day, I recounted the incident to my mother, and we both had a good laugh. I didn't mention to her that he was a technician. I simply told her that a guy who seemed to be about a dozen years older than me had asked me out. At the age of 20, I had already dated more than 2 guys. I was far from being a virgin, but I still had self-respect. After that day, my husband didn't approach me again, and we lost contact because he stopped coming to our college for repairs. I didn't even notice his absence and continued with my life. It wasn't until almost 6 months later that I saw him again. During my second year of college, I accompanied my brother to pick up some tools for the bike he had purchased. I didn't feel the need to inquire about how he acquired the bike because I assumed he had enough money for it. After all, he was supporting me through college, so I assumed he could afford such things. It was on that day at the tool shop that I met my future husband, who was also there to buy tools. Strangely, my brother greeted him like they were old friends, even though they had never met. It's one of those moments when men feel compelled to acknowledge a fellow shopper just because they happen to be looking for the same set of tools. To be honest, I felt embarrassed to see him there, considering how I had turned him down before. He smiled at me and asked how I was, to which I inquired why he had stopped coming to our college. He explained that he had become busy and was in the process of starting his own mechanic shop, which was why he was at the store to purchase tools. We engaged in conversation for a while before I left with my brother. Over time, I ran into him on several occasions, and we eventually exchanged phone numbers. Our relationship began as a friendship, but he was clear about his desire for something more. However, I wasn't ready for a romantic involvement with him at that time. Then I received a shock when my brother informed me that he could no longer financially support my college education. That day, I cried myself to sleep. My brother claimed he had run out of money, but the truth was that he had been embezzling funds from his employer. Yes, my brother had been stealing from his boss. who only became suspicious when my brother purchased the bike. It raised suspicions because the boss knew the exact amount my brother earned as a salary, and it didn't align with his newfound possessions. As a result, my family found itself in debt and struggling to make ends meet. During this challenging period, I didn't confide in my husband about my family's financial woes because I was too ashamed. At the time, we were still just friends. However, my husband asked me out a few weeks later. I won't deny the truth. I entered into a relationship with him because I was financially strained. He had the means to support himself and even buy gifts for me. I don't feel ashamed to admit this because, in that situation, I felt I had no other choice. My family was drowning in debt, and I was on the brink of quitting college. Desperation for survival led me to cling to my only lifeline. Eventually, I confided in him about my college tuition, and he requested some time. Several weeks later, he provided the money I needed for my college fees. I felt immense gratitude, and, in addition, took up a part-time job at a restaurant to earn some income. I tied the knot with my husband while I was still a college student. He proposed a year later, and I accepted. He had been my pillar of support, and after everything he had done for me, I couldn't say no. My parents also encouraged me to marry him and not miss this opportunity. I anticipate some people may wonder why I didn't just marry a wealthy millionaire when I was financially strained. Well, this is real life, not a Hollywood movie. Finding and marrying a rich man in the real world isn't that simple. It's not like you can just stumble upon a wealthy man who instantly falls in love with you and marries you. I opted for the most secure choice, which was my husband. He expressed his readiness to settle down, and I had no qualms about it. I didn't possess the looks of a Kim Kardashian, so the chances of me crossing paths with a Kanye West were slim. After our marriage, I managed to complete my college education 2 years later. My husband wasn't the overly romantic type. He didn't buy me flowers or take me on romantic dates. He hadn't been that way before we got married, so I didn't expect it. Finding a job, even with my college degree, proved to be a challenge. Consequently, I returned to full-time work at the restaurant I had previously worked at. While I didn't love my husband in a passionate way, I cared for him. Our marriage was practical, devoid of intense romantic feelings. We cared for and supported each other. 5 years ago, I gave birth to my first child, a baby girl. During that time, I ceased working as my husband insisted on exclusive breastfeeding. Balancing breastfeeding and employment had been exhausting, so I became a stay-at-home mom. Even after our daughter reached an age where she could attend nursery, I chose not to resume working. This was my personal decision. I chose to stay home because I found working at the restaurant incredibly tiring. Surprisingly, my husband had no issues with my decision. He occasionally sent money to my family. We resided in a rented apartment, but we were well fed. It marked a significant improvement from my life before marriage. My first job as an elementary school teacher was a welcome change as it allowed me to leave the house. I found this job less taxing than my previous restaurant job. Now let me share my story of infidelity, but I can't disclose the school's name for personal reasons. Please bear with me. I developed a crush on one of my fellow teachers at the school. I'm aware of the potential backlash this may receive, but yes, I had feelings for a colleague while I was married. My husband, who is 10 years older than me, didn't share many of my interests. I still felt young and didn't want to lead a dull life, even though I had chosen to marry at a young age. There were aspects of life I hadn't yet explored. When my colleague asked me out, I agreed, despite being married. He knew about my marital status but pursued me nonetheless. We kept our relationship a secret at work, and I'm fully aware that I shouldn't have cheated on my husband. I wanted to experience the excitement that my marriage seemed to lack. It wasn't a reflection of how my husband treated me. It was simply a choice I made. I understand that people might label me negatively, but I couldn't resist the temptation. I continued dating my colleague for several months before we decided to end things. There wasn't any specific reason for the breakup, we just felt it was time. But my affair didn't end there. I met someone else and started a new relationship. Initially, I felt ashamed of my actions, but as time passed, I cared less about what others might think. My husband didn't seem to notice any of it, so I carried on. While the income from my elementary school job wasn't substantial, it still served important purposes. My husband was the primary breadwinner, and I didn't use my earnings for personal expenses. I wasn't ashamed of this because I believed in the traditional role of a man providing for the family. I vowed not to end up like my mother, who sacrificed herself to support my father, only for him to cheat on her. I saved all the money I earned in my bank account. Although I didn't have a specific goal in mind, I simply wanted to afford things like bags that were once out of reach. I had saved money for 4 years and never touched it unless my family needed assistance, or I wanted to buy something new. It might sound unbelievable, but it's the truth. My husband managed the household finances with his modest income, and he never complained. I didn't think he had any reason to complain. Perhaps I'm harsh in my judgment, but it's influenced by the trauma I witnessed my mother endure. In a way, I felt like my father, who betrayed my mother even though she provided for him. The only difference is that I didn't become pregnant and bring another child into my husband's home. Did I feel guilty? Yes, a part of me did experience guilt, but that changed when my husband decided to act maliciously. I thought I wouldn't get caught, but somehow he discovered my infidelity. I didn't have any incriminating texts or phone calls, but he still found out. I noticed changes in his behavior towards me for weeks. He stopped eating the meals I prepared and preferred to dine out. About a week ago, my husband returned home early and asked to use my phone to make a call since his calls weren't being answered. I found it unusual because he had never used my phone before, but I unlocked it and handed it to him. I had no reason to worry because I had no messages or calls suggesting infidelity. I hadn't even saved my partner's number in my phone. I didn't stand there and watch him use it because I didn't want to seem suspicious. I went to the kitchen and pretended to be busy making a salad. He called me when he was done and returned my phone. I had completely forgotten about that incident because nothing appeared suspicious. However, something happened 3 days ago. I received a debit alert for over $10,000, wiping out all the money I had saved over 4 years. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but it was real. My entire savings were gone, except for the remaining $200. I felt like I was going crazy and could barely catch my breath. That money represented my life savings. I rushed to my bank to inquire about the transaction. They informed me that there were no signs of suspicious activity and that it was a legitimate withdrawal. I initially thought I had been scammed, but it turned out my husband was the one who withdrew the money from my bank. He obtained my card's PIN from my phone. I can't be the only one who saves passwords in their phone, right? Well, it ended up costing me dearly. I wanted to scream and vent my frustration because I couldn't comprehend what had happened. Everything I had worked hard to save was gone. When my husband returned that day, I wasted no time accusing him of stealing from me. He laughed in my face and revealed that he found out about my affair through a friend of his who worked at my partner's workplace. I used to visit my partner at his workplace because I believed it was a safer option. He had been aware for a long time but kept it a secret to execute his plan for revenge. He accused me of using him to support my family and myself while I was cheating and saving money. If you're wondering how he found out about the money I saved, let me explain. He figured I must have been saving because I wasn't contributing to the household. My husband was aware of my job's earnings, so he sought revenge. After laughing in my face, he left the house and hasn't returned since. I may have been unfaithful, but my husband's actions were heartless. He stole from me money I had saved for 4 long years. It represented all I had, yet he took it as retribution for my infidelity. I'm overwhelmed with anger and worry, uncertain about the state of my marriage. Update. It's hard to believe that 2 months have passed since I made this post. Many of you didn't hold back in the comments, ha. I've been labeled as the ultimate cheating opportunist by some. While many expressed their disgust, there were others who could relate to my desperation. I'm relieved to know I'm not alone. Nobody's perfect, and I'm far from it. I made a mistake by cheating, but I don't regret choosing the safest option and marrying the man I believed could provide for me. It was a matter of survival. My marriage couldn't endure because honestly, I couldn't look at my husband the same way. He stole from me, and I cheated on him. We were beyond repair. I was left with only $200 to survive, completely broke. 3 weeks later, my husband served me with divorce papers and gave me a month to vacate the apartment. My parents were angry with me for ruining the marriage that had provided money, so they weren't willing to take me in. I had to plead with a colleague to let me stay at her place until I received my monthly salary. My child spent weekends with me, but the rest of the week with her father because I couldn't afford to provide for both of us yet. I'm no longer with my partner, and I'm single, going through a divorce. When you think of a miserable, financially struggling woman, think of me. Haha, I'm still working on getting my life back together. It's a process, but I'll get there. Maybe I need to part ways with my husband to find my own path in life without taking shortcuts. Thank you to everyone who took the time to read my story and share their thoughts.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
I'm a 27-year-old guy, and my fiancée is a 26-year-old woman, whom I'll refer to as L. My father is 52 years old, and I'll call him B, while my mother is 50 years old, and I'll refer to her as R. Like many who've experienced something like this, I never thought it would happen to me. But here we are. Elle and I first met during her freshman year of college when we both lived in the same dorm building, which is where we eventually crossed paths. We later discovered that we lived in towns only about 20 minutes apart, so whenever we went home, I'd offer to drive her with me. It wasn't a big inconvenience. After multiple trips and spending time together at school, we started dating. Both of our families are close-knit, so we shared the news with them right away. I had met her family several times while dropping her off, but it was more of a brief introduction and polite exchanges. Both of our families welcomed each other with open arms, and our relationship blossomed. I graduated a year ahead of her and returned home, where I received a good job offer with excellent pay. Whenever I had the chance, I visited her at school, and when she came home, we made sure to spend quality time together. After her graduation, she moved in with me since both of our jobs were in the city near our hometown. Just like me, she was offered a position at the same company she currently works at, with a generous salary. After living together for approximately 3 years, I proposed, and we've been planning our wedding since then. Now, let's get to the part you're all here for. In hindsight, I realized that there were many things I overlooked, attributing them to my father's efforts to welcome my ex into our family. For instance, my father frequently called her, and when I was present, they would tell me they were discussing upcoming family events or similar topics. Once, while Elle was in the shower, her phone rang, and I noticed it was my dad calling. I answered, and when he realized it was me, he sounded both upset and surprised. I asked what was going on, and he mentioned he wanted to talk to Elle about my mother's upcoming birthday, which was a week away. After a brief conversation, we ended the call. Even as I type this now, I feel like an idiot for not seeing the signs earlier. The day I found out felt like any other. Elle had Thursdays off, so she prepared breakfast for both of us. When I left for work, she kissed me and wished me a great day. During my drive to work, I realized I had forgotten some paperwork I needed for a 3 p.m. meeting. I brushed it off, deciding I'd go home during lunch to retrieve it. Throughout the day, Elle texted me about ordinary couple stuff like dinner plans and doing the laundry. It didn't occur to me to let her know I was coming home for lunch, so when the time came, I simply left work and headed home. Upon arriving, I noticed a car that resembled my father's in our parking lot. However, I didn't think much of it and parked before entering our building. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a scene straight out of a cliched movie, where a man comes home early and catches his spouse cheating. A trail of clothes, both his and hers, led to my bedroom, and faint moans echoed through my apartment. I stood at the door, utterly shocked. My brain was a mix of rage, sadness, and disgust, but to an observer it would seem as if I were a statue, unable to move. When I finally snapped out of it, not knowing how much time had passed, I grabbed my phone to record, collected all the clothes scattered on the floor, and threw them into the hallway of the building. Next, I filmed my walk to my bedroom. The door was open, and I stood in the doorway, recording for about a minute before flipping on the lights. They both jumped at the sudden light and looked at me. To my utter shock, it was my father in bed with her. After the initial stun, my father noticed I was recording and began to panic, desperately trying to find something to cover himself while telling me to stop recording. He eventually found a towel and wrapped it around himself before walking toward me. I warned him that if he didn't want to get hurt, he should stop coming closer. He either didn't care or didn't hear me and reached for my phone. I struck him squarely on the jaw, causing his head to bounce off the door, and he slumped to the ground. Elle shrieked, and I aimed the camera at her, asking if she had anything to say to her fiancé. My father woke up after a brief nap, and I informed them that I just needed to pick something up for work, so I'd be heading back. I warned them that if either of them were still there upon my return, I'd send the video to everyone they knew. I ended the recording, looked at my dad, who was still coming to, and told him he was dead to me, no longer my father. I suggested he should go home and talk to Mom because I'd be discussing this with her very soon. I sat in my car for a while until one of my bosses from work called to ask where I was. I assured her that I was on my way back right now. When I reached her office to hand her the paperwork, I must have looked terrible because she began asking what was wrong. I told her it was nothing and that I'd be okay. She examined me closely, noticing some blood on my collar. Concerned, she rushed to me and exclaimed that I was bleeding. I looked down and explained that it was my father's blood. She appeared confused, so I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. She watched the entire video. While she had met Elle a few times, she had never met my father. She sat in silence for a moment until it finally hit her that my fiancé was cheating on me. Not only was she cheating, but it was with my father. She asked if there was anything she could do and suggested I take some time off. However, I told her I couldn't go back there right now. I just needed a minute, and I'd be fine for the meeting. I mentioned having another shirt in my office. The meeting went smoothly, and I put on a smile for everyone, acting like nothing had happened. After the meeting, my boss approached me and asked how I could do that. I simply replied, "I don't know," and headed to my office. Later, when I returned home, I was alone for the first time in a very long while. I definitely need to leave this apartment. I can't live here anymore, and there's no way I'm sleeping in that bed. I realize I need to get checked out for STDs, and I think I may have broken something in my hand. Update. After I documented the events, I closed my computer and fell into a deep depression. Posting about it hit me hard, like a sudden blow. To those who suspect this might be fabricated, I genuinely wish I possessed such creativity. I would be writing books instead of working a 9-5 job. So, the day after I initially posted, I attempted to get in touch with my mother, but none of my calls were going through. I wanted to see if she would have lunch with me so I could explain everything to her. After about a dozen unsuccessful attempts, I made the decision to get into my car and drive to my mother's house. She needed to know what had happened as soon as possible, even if recounting it would reopen old wounds. During the drive, I contemplated what I would say and how to say it, which started to induce panic. I had to pull over twice to vomit. It's not an everyday occurrence to inform your mother that her husband is involved with your fiancé. I pulled into the driveway and remained in my car for a moment to collect my thoughts and calm down. I sat in my car for a few minutes before my mother flung open her front door, so I stepped out of my car. She began to berate me, questioning how I could come to her home after I had confronted my father for attempting to intervene in a dispute between Elle and me. She used every derogatory term in the book and accused me of being an offender. She insisted that I leave because Elle wasn't ready to forgive me yet, and she hoped she never would. Yes, it turns out my father brought Elle to our family's home and falsely informed my mom that Elle and I had a disagreement, and I hit him when he intervened. She continued to berate me until I finally couldn't take it anymore and said, "Really, Mom? It's because your husband is involved with my fiancé that I hit him. If you can't believe me, I have a video to prove it. But don't expect to see me again. I don't want your apology when you realize you're just as awful a mom as my terrible father." Her expression shifted dramatically, resembling the shock I felt when I walked into my apartment and caught them. I took out my phone and sent her the video. My mom grabbed her phone and watched it, stopping when I turned on the lights. She then set her phone down, looked at me, but I turned away and headed to my car. I reversed out of her driveway, glanced back at her, and saw she was in tears. My heart ached for her, but too much had been said during that argument for me to reconsider and forgive her. Upon returning home, I began to remove everything associated with Elle and my family from my apartment. I packed up all of Elle's belongings and placed them by the front door. Legally, this has been her place of residence, so I can't technically evict her. Her name isn't on the lease, and she tends to avoid confrontation. If she returns, other than to retrieve her things, there's bound to be plenty of conflict. I boxed up anything related to my parents and placed it in storage. As I mentioned in my initial post, we were a very close-knit family, but I've never hesitated to cut out toxic individuals from my life. I messaged Elle's parents, called off the engagement, and informed them about her infidelity. I expressed gratitude for their support and kindness toward me. Our relationship was still developing, and this revelation added more pain to the mix. I concluded by requesting that they collect all of her belongings. I haven't received a response from them yet, but I hope they come to retrieve her things so Elle has no reason to return here. Update. After my last post, I decided to start taking care of everything that needed attention, such as getting tested, finding a therapist, moving, and, of course, getting a new bed. I began by calling my doctor's office and informed them that I needed to get tested and requested a referral to a therapist. I had my first therapy appointment 2 weeks ago, and we decided to continue meeting once a week. I also underwent testing last week, but I'll have to wait another week or so for the results, so please keep your fingers crossed for me. I reached out to a friend who is a real estate agent, and he sent me numerous property listings. I ultimately chose a refurbished cabin on the outskirts of my city, and I finished moving just 2 days ago. After settling in, I called Elle's parents to inform them that I had moved out and that Elle had yet to retrieve her belongings. I also mentioned that the landlord would start showing the apartment in a few days, so they needed to collect her things before it was too late. That message seemed to motivate them, as the following day, my former landlord texted me, thanking me for emptying the apartment. Currently, no one knows my new address except for the friend who helped me secure this place, so I'm confident that neither Elle nor my parents will drop by unexpectedly. The only downside to this new place is that I've traded a 10-minute walk to work for a 45-minute drive. My phone has been inundated with texts and calls from Elle, my parents, and some of my friends, but I have no interest in speaking to anyone except my therapist. At work, I've become somewhat of a recluse. I go in, complete my tasks, and leave. On the rare occasion that I have to interact with someone, I put on a fake smile and pretend that everything is okay. My boss, mentioned in my previous post, has been trying to check in on me more frequently, but I don't share much with her either. I simply express my appreciation and reassure her that I'll be okay. A significant part of me feels like it's gone forever, beyond any hope of revival. My therapy sessions seem to be going well, I guess. I've never had therapy before, so I don't have a basis for what makes therapy good or not. My therapist and I seem to have a decent rapport, and she genuinely appears to want to assist me. During the first session, we focused on getting to know each other and touched on why I sought her help, although we didn't delve too deeply into it. I shared what happened in my own words. In the second session, we went a bit deeper, and she inquired about my relationship with my parents. I explained that it had been great until recently, with open communication and a loving home, but now it all seems meaningless. She asked about why I cut my mother out of my life, and I told her that my mother had said hurtful things to me, things I wouldn't even say to someone I despised. I conveyed that there was no way for her to come back from that. At the conclusion of our last session, I provided her with the link to my page here so she can read more about my thoughts and feelings. I find it easier to express myself in writing than verbally. So if you're reading this, hello, Doc. I'm still feeling unhappy at the moment. I had expected to feel okay by now, not necessarily happy, but just okay. I recognize that some of this is my own fault for not keeping in touch with my friends, but the thought of responding to them is exhausting. I know they'll want to spend time together or visit my new place, but I don't have the energy to be around them right now. Until I regain that energy, I'll focus on work, attend appointments, and relax on my back deck with some low-quality whiskey, trying to appreciate the beautiful view. I haven't gone hunting since high school, so maybe I'll take it up again now that I can hunt from my back porch. Thanks to all of you for reading this far. In my previous post, I mentioned getting tested for STDs and trying to restart my life. I'm pleased to report that I am free of STDs and I couldn't be more relieved. I have completely settled into my new place. When I described it as a refurbished cabin, I may have been a bit too generous. It was actually refurbished about 30 years ago, so it's a bit outdated. However, with my newfound free time, I decided to renovate it. And all that remains is painting the guest room, which I've turned into an office. The only tasks I didn't handle on my own were electrical and plumbing work, because I lack the knowledge and have no desire to risk getting shocked or dealing with dirty pipes. Doing all the work has been remarkably stress-relieving and has helped me clear my mind. I'm still working at the same company, and I've become more open with some of my coworkers, especially those I'm close to, and with my boss from my previous post. thanks to my therapist's advice. Now, let me provide an update on what's been happening between my family and my ex. I felt ready to have a conversation with my mother, so a little over a month ago, I unblocked her number and reached out. I called, and she picked up almost instantly, though I could tell from her tone that she was in a panic. After reassuring her that it was me, I suggested we meet and talk. She agreed, and a day later, we met at a diner near her house. She was already there when I arrived, and when she saw me, she began to quietly cry. As I sat down, she repeatedly apologized, telling me she believed what she was told because she never thought they would actually get together. I expressed my appreciation for her apology, but reminded her that the things she said to me were terrible and something no mother should ever say to their child. It revealed to me how she truly felt about me. She cried even harder and promised that it wasn't true. She explained that when she was informed that I had allegedly hit my father for no reason, she was consumed by anger, and when I showed up at the house, she allowed her anger to take over. Not wanting to engage in a prolonged discussion with her, I decided to move forward. I asked, "Speaking of that guy, what have you decided to do with him?" She explained that they've been separated. She kicked him out since the day after I sent her the video, and she immediately sought legal advice. Then we shifted our conversation to my ex. She mentioned that when I distanced myself, she went back into the house and threw them both out because she was too disgusted to look at them. We talked for about an hour in total. Before I left, I expressed how I had been going through a dark period in my life, and because of the hurtful things she had said to me, I felt like I didn't have my mother when I needed her. Because of that, I wasn't sure if I could have her in my life. I did mention that I was willing to work on our relationship, but it would be at my own pace. However, before I could leave, she stopped me and said she had something important to tell me. I sat back down, and she shared that Elle is pregnant. Apparently, Elle had come to the house and informed my mom. She wasn't sure if the child is mine or my father's, and Elle wanted to know if I had been in touch so she could inform me. Clearly, I hadn't been in contact, so my mom sent her away. That's the update for now. I have a lot on my mind, and I'm not sure how to navigate my emotions or what to do next. Thank you for reading, and I apologize for going on and on.